Hey folks, welcome to the very first episode of a series we're going to call Doug's Pickups Podcast. We're going to catalog all the crazy things that happen to me when I go game hunting. I've been doing this for decades, and I guess one of the reasons I've been doing this for so long is I seem to be a magnet for the weirdest and most insane items and situations. On this first episode, we're going to talk about a recent pickup story that involved me obtaining one of the rarest items in the Atari library. So let's set the stage. I am going for a lovely weekend drive with my producer, Cassandra Hammerstone. We are driving all over New England, and we are approaching Saratoga, New York, probably about a half hour outside of Saratoga. I decide, because Cassandra Hammerstone happens to be driving and I'm the passenger, I love searching Facebook Marketplace locally for wherever we happen to be and regionally as well. I'm sure it would be no surprise to anyone that one of the keywords I'm always looking at in these situations is Atari, being an Atari nerd and aficionado that I am. And to my absolute surprise, shock, amazement, I saw the following ad pop up in one of these searches. Now, okay, you might be saying to yourself, it's just another Atari lot. $500, you got a deck, you got a whole smattering of games. They are boxed games, and that's pretty cool. But what exactly is it that put that tingle up and down your spine? I noticed immediately in the corner, the top right corner of this picture of this lot, something was shiny. Most Atari games aren't shiny. So, sure enough, I zoomed in, and there it was. Confirmation of the most incredible thought that had crossed my mind. Did I just lay my hands on a boxed copy of Chase The Chuckwagon? I did. I'm looking at a Chase The Chuckwagon. Now, why am I mind blown over this? Well, let's take a little bit of a step backward here and look at the history of this particular game. Chase the Chuckwagon was a game commissioned by the Ralston Purina Corporation, the foremost dog food manufacturing interest in 1983, the leader in commercially available dog food. Many who were around back then will remember the iconic television commercials that they produced ahead of its time in terms of special effects and animation, where a Chuck Wagon will jump out of the screen and cause severe emotional trauma, no doubt, to a dog who then chases the Chuck Wagon through the house and then is rewarded at the end of said pursuit with a delicious bowl of Purina Chuck Wagon dog food.
A dog can get mighty hungry when he doesn't get his Chuck Wagon, because dogs love the soft meat-like chunks, the brown crunchy bits, the rich broth Chuck Wagon makes when you add warm water. Serve your dog Chuck Wagon. Chances are he's already waiting for it.
And really, isn't that just like a fever dream? That's the story of Purina Chuck Wagon. It's iconic, it's a brand, and those same marketing folks that thought it would be a great idea to have these trippy commercials also said to themselves, it's 1983, we're almost at the video game crash of 1983. Let's jump into Atari video games. We need a promotional Atari cartridge. That'll sell more dog food. And sure enough, they probably opened the phone book, turned it to T for third-party Atari cartridge manufacturers, stuck a finger right in that page, and came up on Spectravision, which was, at the time, one of the biggest third-party developers of Atari cartridges. So, as the lore goes, the great marketing execs from Ralston Purina reach out to Spectravision and say, hey, we've got this idea. We want a promotional Chase the Chuck Wagon Atari cartridge. Oh, by the way, we need it immediately. Could you do it over a weekend? And Spectravision was like, hey, I don't know what you're smoking, but that looks really good. We'll get right on it. Spectravision then reaches out to a gentleman named Mike Schwartz and says, hey, Mike, we need a game based on Purina Chuckwagon dog food. We need it in 72 hours. Can you hook us up? And Mike, I imagine, I know he's been interviewed, and I'm guessing his inner monologue was sort of like, what the f***? But clearly he agreed to do it. He designed, developed, wrote, tested Chase the Chuckwagon in 3 days over a weekend. Now, as you can imagine, and this is no disrespect to Mike Schwartz, I'm sure he's a hell of a guy, and he's probably a very competent and capable developer. No one in their right mind can write the next great video game in 3 days. And as you may have heard, if you're familiar with this game, if you've ever seen it talked about on social media, on the YouTubes, what have you, this is a much maligned game. The gameplay is pretty bad. There are some fundamental design problems. But again, I'm not here to crap on Chase the Chuckwagon, the game. It was made in 3 days. The fact that it even runs and plays, I think, is damn near miraculous. So anyhow, Chase the Chuckwagon, created in 3 days, not available in stores. You could not buy this game at retail. You had to find an advertisement for Chase the Chuckwagon in the newspaper, in your favorite dog food periodicals. I'm not sure where they were advertising this, but the gist of it was if you sent in enough proofs of purchase of Purina dog food, they would send you this cartridge in the mail. And sure enough, that's what you'd get. You'd get this shiny, reflective silver cardboard box. You'd get one sheet of paper that was the instructions and the cartridge itself. It is unclear as to the exact number of copies that were sold. It has been established that Ralston Purina destroyed all the unsold copies, which implies no matter what, there was only one print run. It was probably fairly small to begin with, and at least some non-trivial amount of them were destroyed because no one sent in their proofs of purchase. It is generally accepted that this is one of the rarer games in the Atari library, but I will say that what is spectacularly rare is a copy that actually still has the box and the manual intact. As with most video games, the generally accepted surviving population of that game, a small percentage of that is presumed to actually have the original box and paperwork because, of course, most people throw it out immediately. So let's get back up to the top layer of the onion. I'm looking at this Facebook Marketplace ad. I'm seeing this incredibly rare title. They're asking $500 for it. I need to seal this deal right away. Now, in my excitement, in my lack of regular thinking skills, I on the spot chose the worst possible strategy that you could take in this situation. What I should have done was said, I will purchase this lot immediately. Please give me a location to meet you, and I will be on my way. Because, unfortunately, I am, by my own admission, a very cheap bastard. I messaged this seller and said, hey, would you piece out this weird silver box game for X amount of money? And in retrospect, again, this was a terrible idea. It's telling the seller that they may have something special in this lot that they didn't consider. I shouldn't have done that. But nonetheless, I turned to Cassandra Hammerstone, and she's still driving, telling her all about this amazing thing. But I hadn't yet given her that one detail, which was, where is this located? You see, I think she was under the impression it was somewhere in Saratoga. We'd be on the way. We'd be driving there. Unfortunately, the way Facebook Marketplace works, even when you do local searches to a zip code, you tend to get more regional things. And in fact, this particular ad was posted from somewhere in central New Hampshire, 3.5 hours away in the opposite direction. So now I had multiple negotiations going on at the same time. I am going to attempt to make contact with the seller and negotiate to piece out, cherry pick the most important piece of a lot that's otherwise uninteresting without getting backdoored by other potential buyers or the seller realizing that they had something worth far more than the entire asking lot price. And I was going to negotiate with the love of my life to abandon our weekend pleasure drive through Saratoga and instead do a crazy, unbelievable, stupid cannonball run across the entirety of New England in the hopes that maybe we wouldn't get ghosted or otherwise shenaniganed. Oh, I made up a new word, shenanigan, on this deal. So the stakes had never been higher. Before we even hear back from the seller, we agree. We got off on the highway, got back on the opposite direction, and, well, maybe possibly took a little liberties with the posted speed limits. To my great luck here, the seller got back to me. It was willing to potentially piece out a couple of these games for me, and we even negotiated a price that they were okay with. Now, interesting footnote, as we can continue on, and I tell the seller at this point, hey, we're going to make a road trip here. It's going to take us about 3 hours plus to get there, if that's okay with you. So whatever we're going to meet, it's going to be about 3 hours from now. And they were okay with that, and were actually kind of impressed that I'd be willing to drive that far for an Atari game. Also, not necessarily something that works in my favor, because for most sellers, that's setting off flags. Like, why is this knucklehead driving across the eastern seaboard for a little piece of cardboard with a cartridge in it? But nonetheless, we continue to drive our way through there. We've got about 3 hours to go. It ended up actually being closer to 4 with traffic. I get a follow-up message when we're en route saying, hey, you know, not for nothing, but dozens of people have now messaged me about this game. And clearly, I suspect it's worth a little more than we agreed to. But, and this was important, the seller said, I am a person of my word, and I'll honor the deal. So, oh, wow, that's interesting. Now the tension is even higher because it's like, okay, there's a few hours for this person to have second thoughts about their honor system. There's a few hours for somebody to go really crazy and offer the moon for this game, which would really be the ultimate test. So let me tell you something. This drive across New England was probably one of the most tension-filled drives I'd ever experienced. It was crazy, white-knuckling it, and I wasn't even the driver. I was the passenger. Finally, we get there to the location, and sure enough, they pull up. I was shocked. I was amazed. I was enthralled. I realized I still wasn't out of the woodwork because there's always the possibility they show up and show me the list of bids that have happened, and I wouldn't fault them for saying, look, you're going to have to match these bids. It's unfair to me otherwise. I would be unhappy, but I'd accept that probably is a possibility. But nonetheless, they showed up. They opened the hatch, and sure enough, that beautiful silver rectangle of cardboard staring me right in the face. And boy, was she a beaut. Nice sharp corners, very little surface wear. Everything looks great. And sure enough, the seller did indicate there was a tremendous amount of interest, but reiterated they were a person of their word, and they were not going to change the agreed-upon price that we had, which, quite frankly, was, well, probably about 10 cents on the dollar. Now, in terms of circling back a bit on the rarity of this game, it's not just me speculating that it's rare. We have a few interesting data points. First example would be price charting, which is really these days kind of considered one of the authoritative places to value a game, but you can also kind of imply how many of these are out on the open market. When you look at price charting for Chase the Chuckwagon for Atari 2600 Complete, you'll see that there's approximately 14 transactions recorded in the last 10 years. So that means that roughly once a year, maybe a little bit more than that, you'll see one even come up on the open market on eBay, which is still, for better or worse, the largest marketplace for video games that are being sold. It is entirely possible that that does not mean that there were 14 separate complete copies. It is quite plausible that some of those copies had changed hands more than once over the course of the 10 years. I don't think it's unreasonable to infer from that data point that there may be less than 24 complete copies left in existence out there. Now you talk about condition. I suspect that a number of those transactions involved complete copies that were in relatively poor condition. The condition of the game that I purchased was absolutely outstanding. So much so that despite the fact that some people I know will groan when I say this, I did choose to go and send that game out to be graded. Even though it was a complete in-box game, we sent it out to CGC. It came back, to my amazement, is an 8.5. Now, this is, again, an Atari game from 1983 that was mail order. It wasn't exactly a case where it might have been, lucky enough to come fresh from a case in a store to someone who was going to give it to someone as a Christmas gift. It sat in a desk drawer, and this was something that was manhandled, and it still came back an 8.5. What that actually means in terms of condition and how many are out there, for perspective, there is only one other complete in box graded copy of Chase the Chuckwagon from my research on the population reports from WADA grading and from conversations with folks at CGC. There is one sealed copy that exists that is known to exist. So it appears that my graded complete in box copy is one of two at that level of condition in the world, again, aside from the sealed copy. So this truly is an extremely rare item. And sure enough, again, while I didn't necessarily pay a lot monetarily for it, I admittedly probably took about 3 years off my life in the process of acquiring it. So quite the adventure to go on. But in fact, I chased the Chuck Wagon, and I'm one of those silly fools that actually caught that son of a And with that, that concludes my first episode of Doug's Pickups podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I would love to hear in the comments your thoughts, not only about this episode. Would you like to see me do more pickup stories? Do you like the cut of my jib? That sort of thing. I really want your feedback. It's super helpful to everything we do here. Folks, thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy the stuff that I put out. We're really trying to build this channel up. And I'll see you next time on Doug's Pickups podcast.